Hey everyone, my name is Danielle and I'm so excited to continue our series called Happily Ever After. It's about one thing we all have, feelings. Now, before we get started on our talk today, let me ask you a question. Have you ever experienced a feeling that didn't quite line up with the situation you were in? Almost like you felt the opposite of how you thought you'd feel. Let me tell you about a time when I was in high school and I experienced a feeling that didn't quite match up with how I thought I'd feel. So in high school, I switched schools the summer before my senior year. I didn't like necessarily leaving my friends that I grew up with, but I was so excited about making a new set of friends. I thought it would be easy and fun, but I remember starting to feel lonely and missing my old friends a whole lot. And to be honest, I was really confused about all the feelings that I felt during that time. I started off so excited, but all of a sudden I got so nervous and I felt alone. And it's safe to say you might have a similar experience with feelings. And that's because for all of us, feeling all the feels is a normal part of life, even when those feelings take us by surprise. Sometimes the feelings we have don't seem to match the circumstances that we're in. This may come across in one of two ways. First, it happens when we hide our feelings from the people around us. Maybe your parents told you that they were separating and you had to show up to the school that you were at like nothing happened. You put on a big happy face on the outside, but on the inside you were feeling anxious and sad. Maybe you didn't make the final cuts for the play, but all of your friends did. And you congratulated them, of course, but on the inside you felt anything but happy about it. Maybe your friend group changed this year and you felt left out. You acted like you were carefree and unbothered, but in reality, you were really hurt. Second, our feelings can surprise us when we feel things we don't expect to feel. Maybe you lost a loved one recently, and while you thought you'd be sad, you may have felt total and complete anger instead. Maybe you failed a big test that would get you into the honors program at school, but instead of feeling disappointed, you just felt relief. Our feelings have a way of being a little confusing at times, don't they? This is true in so many areas of our life, but especially true in our faith. Because when our feelings don't match our circumstances, we don't just question our feelings, sometimes we question our faith too. We can wonder if God is happy with us when we're not happy. If we're hurting, sad, or angry, then we might think God must have forgotten or abandoned us. If we're joyful and excited in one moment, we may worry that something bad will happen in the next. When happiness is hard to find, we can begin to question if our faith, the thing that we thought would bring us happiness, is real at all. It's a lot, right? Well, if you're like me, you're probably wondering what to do. What do we do with all the feelings that don't seem to fit? What do we do with all the feelings that feel complicated or opposite of each other and maybe messy? What do we do with all the feelings that make us wonder where God is in all of it? What's cool about navigating all of our feelings today is that we have real life experiences of real people who lived thousands of years ago to look back on and learn from. Their stories, words, and experiences are recorded in Scripture, which is really the best place we can look for answers to anything, feelings included. In Scripture, we find the book of Psalms, a book full of feelings. And many of the Psalms are written by a man named David. What's cool is that the Apostle Paul told a room full of people in Antioch that David was a man after God's own heart. While far from perfect, we can assume that David was close to God throughout his life and turned to God with anything and everything he might have been through or felt. So let's take a look at a few of those words together today. Is there any place I can go to avoid your spirit, to be out of your sight? If I climb to the sky, you're there. If I go underground, you're there. If I flew on morning's wings to the far western horizon, you'd find me in a minute. You're already there waiting. Then I said to myself, oh, he even sees me in the dark. At night, I'm immersed in the light. It's a fact. Darkness isn't dark to you. Night and day, darkness and light, they're all the same to you. I think it's safe to say David was feeling his feels here, huh? I mean, if you know anything about David's story, then you know he went through a lot in his life. Being anointed to be a king, going on the run, fighting a giant, becoming king, leading victoriously, leading not so victoriously, committing crimes, making mistakes, following God. If anybody could understand what it means to feel it all, it was David. That's what makes David's words in this psalm all the more powerful. In the middle of all he was feeling and experiencing, David knew one thing was true. God was there. No matter what he was feeling, David knew God was with him. And not just that, He knew that there was nothing, not one thing, that he could feel that would make God leave him. In his best moments of light and joy, and in his deepest, darkest moments of despair, God was right there with David, helping him understand and navigate his feelings. And since that was true for David all those years ago, then we can trust that it's true for us today too. We can trust that God shows up in all feelings. Let's look at it this way. Have you ever felt grief before? Maybe you grieved over the loss of a loved one. Maybe you felt like things didn't turn out the way you wanted. Or maybe you grieved about what used to be. What about anger? Have you ever felt mad that a situation turned out a certain way? Or upset about something that happened with a family member or friend? And finally, what about anxiety? Do you ever feel anxious or nervous sometimes? Have you ever worried about how things will turn out or what might happen? Through all of these feelings, God is there. God shows up in all the feelings we could ever experience. And how do we know that? Well, what if I told you that Jesus felt every single one of these emotions? Jesus experienced grief. In the Gospel of John, a story of Jesus' life written by one of his closest followers, we read about a time when another close friend of Jesus died. And in response, Jesus felt deep, agonizing grief, and he wept. Jesus got angry when Jesus saw money changers and other sellers in the temple where people from other nations were supposed to worship. Another one of Jesus' friends, Matthew, wrote that Jesus got angry. This was a place for people to worship, not to buy stuff. Jesus got anxious. A guy named Luke, who investigated Jesus' life, recorded this moment when Jesus was faced with knowing he'd soon be crucified. He experienced anxiety and asked God for things to turn out differently. Okay, what am I getting at here? As we read earlier, David cried out to God because he trusted God with his feelings. Jesus wasn't afraid to feel, to get angry, to be anxious, and to cry. You, me, David, Jesus, we know that God shows up in all feelings. And that means no matter what we're feeling, we may still feel worried or surprised or embarrassed by it, but we can trust God to help us understand and feel it. When we're overwhelmed with excitement, when we're navigating deep worry or anxiety, when we're overcome with laughter or joy, when we're grieving or angry, when we're embarrassed or ashamed, when we're confused or scared or surprised, God is there. God can be trusted. God is with us every step of the way because God shows up in all feelings. So when our feelings take us by surprise or overwhelm us, what do? How do we move through them in a healthy way? How do we trust God with all our feels? To start, I want you to try a few things. First, remember what's true. Instead of putting your attention towards what seems confusing or unclear about your feelings, focus on what's true about them, both about God and about what you feel. For starters, you can remember that there are no bad feelings, only uncomfortable ones. And more than that, you can remember that Jesus has felt what you feel. That's true, and it's something you can trust when you're struggling with your feels. And finally, you can look to scripture, like the psalm we read today, to focus on what's true about who God is and where God stands in the midst of your feelings. Secondly, talk to God. When you're surprised or confused by what you feel, don't keep it to yourself. Like David and even Jesus himself, you can trust God with anything you're feeling. And one of the best ways to do that is to start talking to God about it. Talk to God through prayer about how you feel and be honest with how you might need God's help to understand and navigate your way through it. And lastly, talk to someone you trust. Share how you're feeling with a trusted adult, like a parent, a guardian, or maybe a small group leader. Those same trusted adults may be a great resource to help you navigate to additional mental health professionals. Open up about the feelings that confuse or feel uncomfortable to you, and ask for encouragement and guidance to trust that no matter what, God shows up in all feelings. As we wrap up today, I want you to think about an important question. Who is one trusted adult or adults in your life you can talk to when you have feelings you aren't comfortable feeling?